Right now, the day's biggest news stories from a Vegas perspective. This is the Vegas Take with Sharp and Shapiro.
Top of the 10 o'clock hour, it is the Vegas Take, coming away live, 101.5 FM, 720 AM, K-Dawn. Chris Wynn in for Brian Shapiro, along with J.D. Sharp. You can follow us on all our social media streams. Of course, we have the Facebook page, as well as we're on Twitter, Instagram, as well at the Vegas Take. And you can also see us live right now on YouTube TV, as our show is streaming live there as well, too. So we have been talking about the situation regarding President Trump and the impeachment inquiry and, the reaction from around the country and the polarization and where everybody is at on both sides of this issue. And we will continue to do so throughout pending. But right now we have on the phone lines, we're going to discuss a story that we talked about earlier in the week, which was a unique and tragic story out of the Boston area where a young man about just hours away from graduating from Boston College ended up jumping to his death, and his girlfriend has been charged in the case, and something that is extremely unique, to say the least. And joining us now on the phone line is Frank Rudy Cooper. He's a criminal law professor at UNLV to give us his perspective when it comes to the possibility of extradition and what this means from a legal standpoint. Frank, we enjoy and appreciate you jumping on the Vegas Take with us on our Friday.
Thanks a lot, Frank.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on. The main thing that I wanted to say was just this is a really unusual criminal law case, and I can break down a little bit what are the elements that the prosecutor is going to have to prove.
Yeah, because, look, international law experts are saying that this is a novel legal theory of applying manslaughter charges to suicide cases that could be a severe obstacle. Right now we're talking about In Young Yu. She's a 21-year-old from South Korea who's charged in the involuntary manslaughter in the death of her 22-year-old boyfriend, Alexander Utula of New Jersey. Authorities said he jumped from the top of a Roxbury parking garage on May 20th. He was just hours away from graduating from B.C. And now apparently she's returned to South Korea after his death and withdrew from classes at Boston College in August. Now, look, like, Frank, we talked about this earlier in the show, and my point of view was kind of this. I mean, it seemed to me, using the analogy, opening up a can of worms with respect to, charging this woman in this case. Now, look, no one denies that, she could be just an awful human being. But what does this mean from a legal standpoint when you can actually press charges regarding, verbal abuse towards someone and they end up killing themselves?
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. It's a can of worms. There's one precedent in Massachusetts recently, and the basic idea is there are four things that a prosecutor has to prove in every case when they're trying to convict somebody. So the first thing is that there has to have been some kind of action. You can't be prosecuted for a thought crime. Second thing is that you have to have had the mental state that's required for that particular crime. So that just means you have to have had a certain degree of desiring the social harm of the crime. And when we're talking about somebody getting dead, well, that's the social harm. We don't want people getting dead. So you have to have had some degree of desiring that person get dead. The third thing is that you have to have caused the social harm. So you have to have caused this person to get dead. And the fourth thing is that the defendant has to have no defenses. So the defendant could say, yes, I did that, but there was somebody holding a gun to my head and they made me do X, Y, or Z. So the key thing here, as you said, is this idea of bringing a manslaughter charge for somebody committing suicide. And a manslaughter charge is going to require in Massachusetts that there was a sort of wanton disregard for life. And that wanton disregard for life means that it's not just that I was negligent, like I was stupid. So everybody else in the world would, or every reasonable person in the world would have figured out that this guy was going to jump to his death if I kept pushing him, but I didn't figure it out. It's something higher. It's more like recklessness, which is mean-spiritedness. That's where I see that this guy's about to jump to his death, and I just keep pushing him, and I know that I'm going to probably bring about his death, but I just don't care. I'm just a mean person. And so wantonness in Massachusetts is kind of in between that negligence or stupidity and that recklessness or meanness. And so that's what we got to figure out here is, first of all, was she a sort of really mean person with respect to getting him dead?
So, and this is, Chris, you mentioned the slippery slope of, if you tell someone to jump off a bridge and they jump off the bridge, I think this is totally different because she sent 47,000 text messages over 3 months to this guy. I mean, how does that factor in, Frank?
Well, absolutely, that's a problem because we need some evidence that she did some kind of action, as I said, and that's a lot of action, right? 47,000 texts or whatever
That's
it was.
A ton of text messages.
So that's a lot. However, usually when we create homicide statutes, we're not thinking that somebody's going to, say mean words to you and you're going to jump off a bridge. That's not what we're thinking of. We're thinking that they're going to use sticks and stones and actually hit somebody, hurt somebody,
and actually break your bones.
Literally push them off a bridge.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I can see that there's a lot of action here, but this is not the type of action the criminal law usually prosecutes.
So was he mentally ill? Was he on any type of antidepressant medication? Is that information out yet?
I'm not sure about that. He's obviously somebody who was fragile, and what the news reporting suggests is that she knew he was fragile.
Right, exactly.
So that's, again,
and I believe that. I mean, they were in a relationship. They were around each other on a consistent basis. You don't know what if he was paying for everything for her, you don't know exactly what, I mean, emotional abuse, in my opinion, on both sexes, male and female, in a relationship is a very, very real thing. And again, I think that when if this guy tells her that, he loves her on a consistent basis and she tells him, well, you should just kill yourself because you're not good for the world, 47,000 times in 3 months, I think that would apply. Would you not agree?
I don't completely agree because I would hope that if my child were told, you love me, but I think you should just kill yourself, that my child would have the mental fortitude to say, go F yourself. Right.
You're not good. You're not good for me. You're not good for my life. And that's why I'm curious if he was on some type of medication and she was completely aware of that. Now, if you were on a medication and she was aware of that, would that change things because she'd be taking advantage of someone who is susceptible to this type of behavior potentially?
Well, like I said, there's those four elements. You got to do something, you got to have a degree of desiring the social harm, and you got to cause this actual social harm. So it seems to me that the more she knows how vulnerable he is, then we're talking about that mental state that she really seems to have wanted or at least been reckless about his killing himself. So in that sense, I think that makes a difference. But when it comes to causation, there's a huge problem here. We think about human beings as having agency, and we think that, everybody can make up their own minds. And, no matter how many times she tells them to kill himself, we don't expect somebody to kill themselves and say that it's the responsibility of the other person. That really is sort of uniquely a choice that somebody is making about themselves. And I'm hesitant to say she could make him kill himself.
So, yeah, Frank, this is my kind of outlook on this, and I look at it from I'm not a psychiatrist, okay? I'm not a lawyer. I'm not looking at it from a legal standpoint. I'm just an average guy, layperson. I say to myself, you know what? Chris. No matter what she said, as far as no matter how derogatory she was towards this individual, I can't make that connection of what? How do I get from A, B to C, and C being him killing himself because of somebody else's words? I don't make that. I don't understand how you make that connection of, her verbal abuse to the action of him committing suicide as something that can be prosecuted. I guess, can you kind of understand the direction I'm going here? That I don't see that connection, how that can be easily made and how that can transpire. And yes, I think that, it is a absolute slippery slope. If in this case you're going to consider that to be the actual the reasoning behind it, the reason that he killed himself is because of what this woman said, it can apply in a number of other situations that, the person could get, thrown in jail or get prosecuted for, in my opinion.
It's a big thing. The worst thing that we do to people is to convict them of a crime. And what makes it conviction of a crime different than, say, taking a bunch of money from them is that we're saying we as a community, right, the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are saying we condemn you for this awful thing that you did.
Mm-hmm.
And before we use that, sort of supreme power, I want to make sure that it's not going to start getting abused by prosecutors where they say, all right, there weren't 47,000 texts, but there were, 400 texts. Well, what if there were 40 texts? What if there were 4 texts? Is that enough to force somebody to kill themselves? And so, slippery slopes are the things that lawyers make their money off of.
Right.
Because on the one hand, you're going to say, maybe this woman is awful, but on the other hand, we don't want this applied to every time, somebody gets in an argument with somebody and they say, oh, go kill yourself, that, and somebody does, that here comes the prosecutor, here come the police getting ready to try and put this person in jail.
So
I tend to come down on your side.
What separates this particular case from the Michelle Carter case, where she was actually imprisoned? She's currently in jail for what she did to her boyfriend. In your opinion, was what she did more egregious than what this woman did? And what do you think the outcome should be?
Well, I think that the Boston College case is worse. So the Michelle Carter case, she was sort of nudging this guy. She knew he was depressed. And I'm not sure I agree that Michelle Carter should be in jail, but the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts has approved that. And so I guess I would say I still don't think that this ought to be something you can convict somebody of. And I say that knowing that what she did was awful, and that as much as I'd like to think you can't make somebody do something, a lot of us can be pushed by the people we love. Pushed to our death? I hope not. So I guess I would say no, she shouldn't be convicted. But like you say, if Michelle Carter can be convicted, this is worse.
So what do you think?
She will get convicted.
If she doesn't get, say she's not convicted, say she gets away from this scot-free, I don't think you would agree with that. What do you think is an appropriate recourse or repercussions, ramifications for her actions?
Well, let me just stop and say, I don't agree that the something has to happen, right? It's a sort of on-off switch. When it comes to the criminal law, you're either convicted beyond a reasonable doubt or you're not. And so with this particular crime that they're charging her with, there's not really something lower in terms of homicide they can convict her of. This is the lowest level of homicide. So I guess she goes scot-free, quote unquote, but she's not going scot-free in the sense that she's already been subject to sort of public criticism. That's not going to make his family feel good. But sometimes the answer is not that we throw somebody in jail. Sometimes it's something else in between.
Frank Rudy Cooper is joining us live on the phone lines here, criminal law professor at UNLV, live on the Vegas Take. We've been discussing the charges filed against In Young Yu, a 21-year-old from South Korea, who's charged with involuntary manslaughter in the death of her 22-year-old boyfriend, Alexander Erla of New Jersey. Now, of course, we've been discussing, the criminal prosecution possibilities regarding Miss Yu. Now, there's also the situation with extradition, right? And Frank and Rachel Rollins, the DA, the Suffolk District DA, is prepared to seek extradition of the former Boston College student. She is cautiously optimistic that she will return to face charges. Now, the U.S. and South Korea have an extradition treaty dating back to 1999. But I want to get your thoughts on, the extradition. Is there a possibility of problems with that, and of course, provisions that come into play here, Frank?
All right, well, unfortunately, I can't help you a lot because I don't want to go outside of my expertise when it comes to extradition.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't tell you exactly what the details are going to be with respect to extradition. If Rachel Rollins is, sort of cautiously optimistic about this, I'm just going to take her at her word that there's a good chance that could happen. I don't know enough to give a legal opinion on whether the extradition is likely.
Yeah, because I mean, look, I'm just making a general observation here. I got to believe there could be some type of roadblocks, given this isn't an American citizen. This is someone who is able to go back to her country, and we've seen just in other cases in general that can sometimes be an issue of trying to get people back to the United States to face charges that they may have pending.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, that's not one that the extradition issue is not one I can help you with. I think the discussion that we've had just points out that it's a really tough case. What she did was awful, but is it a crime? Hard to say. Now,
do you think that, okay, let's say it's not a crime, but do you think that someone who is in a relationship with someone else that sends them text messages to the tune of 47,000 in 3 months, which translates to what? What is that? It's
a lot.
It's almost it's almost 520 text messages every single day.
But it posed the question,
that's
and I pointed this out,
text
JD, earlier in the
hour.
week. And Frank, I want to get your thoughts. Like, look, doesn't if you're getting bombarded, right, with all this negative attention or negative responses by whether your spouse or your friend or whoever, doesn't it diminish it? Like, doesn't it as it goes on and on and on? Say you're getting hundreds, thousands of times they're saying go kill yourself or go hang yourself or go do this, go do that. To me, it would in my opinion, it would take away every single time that happens. Am I off base on that, do you think?
Well, the little bit that I know about domestic abuse is that, in fact, what happens is that somebody who is abusive can come to gain power over another person.
Right.
And to the extent that they get power over somebody, the more that they're sort of running this water over a rock, but it turns out that rock is not a rock, it's somebody who is susceptible to this. I think more texts like that are going to have an accumulating effect. So on that specific point, I guess I don't agree.
But to finish my thought, don't you think, and I think that someone who does that clearly is mentally ill themselves. Don't you think she should be put into a mental hospital? Don't you think she should be admitted into some type of mental institution for that type of behavior?
You're pushing me beyond my comfort zone. I don't know that I feel that we should involuntarily commit somebody to a mental hospital because of being mean. She should go to a mental hospital, but I don't know that the state should step in and say, we're going to, convict you and put you in a mental hospital instead of jail, or we're going to involuntarily commit you.
And JD, I think it's a fair question, but yeah, I think Frank, you're 100% right. I think this is a question probably for like a mental health expert, right?
Well, yeah,
make an observation.
If you're sending 47,000 text messages in 3 months, clearly you have a mental problem.
I think it is safe to say yes. There probably is an issue there,
especially if those text messages are in a clear effort to get someone to end their life, who you have a relationship with. To me, that person is beyond crazy.
Oh, yeah, and I was just going to say, my quote-unquote legal opinion is she's crazy.
Yes, exactly. You can boil it all down, right? And we have a prediction, we have an expectation. So, Frank Rudy Cooper joining us live on the phone lines, criminal law professor at UNLV, discussing this very unique case, and it could be a watershed case. It could be something that could kind of shake things up from a legal standpoint in this country. So, Frank, we really appreciate you spending some time and sharing your expertise on this particular story, and we want you to have a great weekend. Okay.
You too. Thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, Frank.
Frank Rudy Cooper, a criminal law professor at UNLV, discussing this case. And look, we've been bouncing it back and forth, right, JD, for a few days now. And it is something that look, everybody has an opinion, but it's to me, it's tough because you're trying to assign blame on someone for verbal attacks. I have to admit, the first time I heard this story, I was thinking of Silence of the Lambs. Remember the movie with obviously with Hannibal Lecter, with Anthony Hopkins, when he basically just by berating and by manipulation ended up making that guy kill himself in the cell. Like it was, I think it was a couple cells over from him down in the prison, and that's the first thing I thought of when this story came about, because it just goes to show the type of power, and Frank mentioned it. A lot of it is about power, right? It's about one person having a mental acuity and power over another, but the question, of course, being, is that prosecuting? Is it something where you can you can put it out. You can make a determination that they should be prosecuted and they should be thrown in jail for wording and for verbal abuse. It's just a very tough question, and it doesn't have anything to do with how horrible the person is. Because yes, this woman could be just an awful person, and should be ridiculed the rest of her life.
Clearly, she is an awful person. Unless we find out 3 to 6 months down the road that this guy committed some heinous crime against her, and there's some type of recourse that she has. But to me, it just sounds like she is just a terrible human being who has no business being in society. And again, she's not an unattractive woman, so she is fully capable of doing this again.
It's the Friday edition of the Vegas Take. Chris Wynn in for Brian Shapiro, along with J.D. Sharp. On the other side, we're going to talk to Mr. X, get a Hollywood perspective on what's going down in the world today. We'll be back after this.